This is Moanraj and Rosenbaum Are Humans. I'm Marianne Moanraj.
And I am Benjamin Rosenbaum.
And this is a production of the Speculative Literature Foundation.
Also humans.
Also, well, I mean, we are open to everybody, Ben. Come on. I mean, you know, I live
currently,
for the day.
Sadly, only humans.
Oh, exactly. Excellent. I live for the day when the dolphins join us and the octopi.
I mean, there might be some house pets.
And yeah.
In the SLF.
Yeah. Octopuses, octopodes. Octopi is not.
I hope that someone is listening to this podcast at a time in the future when my having said houseplants is a regrettable slur.
That would be awesome. Yes. You know, I'm still holding out for sentient plants. I wrote a story about sentient plants, and I should go back to that.
Sure.
I love that concept. I never published it, so probably it's due to be revised and sent out into the world. Okay. Today it's good that we're arguing about words and
of course
such.
What else would we be doing?
I know. Our plan for today was a return to the Turkey City Lexicon, which is a primer for SF workshops. We've done an episode on this once before, and it is just an endless font of things to argue about. So,
yeah, exactly. We're looking we're spoiling for something to argue about. I went and re-listened to our episode "Escape from Turkey City" from an earlier season, and the funny thing is that it's called "Escape from Turkey City," but we actually only get to the Turkey City Lexicon about 3/4 of the way through because we spent time arguing. I mean, we only get to the list of things that is in the Turkey City Lexicon because we spent a long time arguing about, workshops in general and critiquing culture and so on. And so we only actually got through 2 of them.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
Call a Rabbit a Smearp and Show Don't Tell were the 2 that we talked extensively about in the previous episode. And just in the interest of like, here's some highlights of things we talked about, which also serves as a list of things stories we're not gonna tell again on this episode because it's been so long for us. We could easily just make the same episode if we don't think about it. So let us assume the following are covered: Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet.
All right.
Clarion versus MFA. Is writing quality objective or subjective? That was a different episode, but I just feel we might get pulled onto that. Okay. The opposite of a critique is also a good critique, and in general, how to take critiques, which, I mean, obviously it's fine if we stray out of these things, but just so we know, we've already talked about that. We spent a long time in that episode on like how positive versus negative versus evaluative versus readerly versus writerly should a critique be? What are we looking for in critiques? Like, it's interesting that the failure mode you often encounter is that people aren't critiquing enough like writers, and I was like, they're critiquing too much like writers.
Yeah.
I don't want to know how you do it. I just want to know what you experienced.
Right.
And so on. That topic. And so we talked about Call a Rabbit a Smurp, and we talked about various bad workshop experience. We talked about Call a Rabbit a Smurp, and we talked about like the poetics of inventing language and engaging with your world building. And Show Don't Tell, we talked about both the pacing function of like crowding versus leaping, and also the emotive function of like distanced language versus close in language. And there was a long and interesting digression about like gestural language and neurotypicality. Anyway, that's what we already talked about. So the Turkey City Lexicon.
I've already forgotten that list, but that's okay. That's okay. That's okay.
I should get a little gong. And if we stray onto one of the forbidden topics, I'll just be like, gong.
All right.
Or like, we'll make a little Vuvuzela noise. Anyway.
Yeah.
If we get onto one of the, and we'll lose 10 points. It'll be a game show. Okay. Yeah. So anyway,
I want to segue, not segue. Yeah. I want a side question.
Sidebar. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sidebar. That's the word. Escape to and return to. They always make me think of the Alexander Keys, and I'm curious whether that's where it comes from. Did he coin that? Escape to which mountain and return to which mountain?
Oh,
or is that earlier? You don't know. Okay.
I feel like it's earlier though. When is that stuff? The Witch Mountain stuff is like mid-60s,
it's old,
early 70s.
Right?
But I feel like it was monster movie stuff.
1968. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. But I feel like the Escape to Return to might well be like
earlier
sort
mode.
of pulp Roger Corman B movie language, like son of monster, return
Well,
of
that's what I
Dracula.
feel like. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it must be earlier. I think
Return of the son of the bride of the creature.
Yeah, it's just where I think it's just where I encountered it first, because it may even be even earlier too, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking like Haggard and Kipling and all of those guys were doing
possibly
that kind of pulpy writing. I don't know if that language got used. Anyway,
I feel like the language of escape from and return to was a way of signaling that it's a sequel without, here's a hypothesis. I don't know if it was important if you're making Roger Corman style B movies and you're churning them out, to not necessarily know which order you're going to release them in. So if you have like Jaws 1, 2, 3, you've got to release them in that order. But if you have like Creature from the Black Lagoon, Son of Creature from the Black Lagoon, Bride of Creature from the Black Lagoon, you don't necessarily, you can bring Son and Bride in either order, like that's whatever fits your calendar. Whoever gets done shooting first, that Wednesday or Thursday. Anyway, nice. So yes,
I like it. If anyone knows the answer to this, if anyone knows the answer to this and is listening, write to us and we'll put it in a future podcast it would be nice to know definitively. Okay, so Turkey City Lexicon came out of just for those who haven't listened to the earlier episode, right? It came out of the Turkey City Workshop in Austin, Texas. Bruce Sterling and other regulars contributed to this. He wrote the introduction, one of the introductions, and the other one is written by Louis Shiner, who edited it. And it's basically, shorthand language that was used in science fiction fantasy critique groups. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think most of them, I think so. In the earlier episode, I also talked about my sort of love-hate relationship to it, and the basic takeaway being, both I think this is an artifact of a wonderful sort of homegrown fan peer critique culture, but also a lot of the things. Some of the things in the lexicon are now completely obsolete and nobody even knows. Like most of the things we read through, it's like, I have no idea what, like we have to read the definitions because I don't know what Brenda Starr syndrome is or detective or whatever. Like a lot of them are just completely, many of them no longer apply. Many of them are fretting about things that at the time were like done too much that now nobody ever does and would be interesting to do again. I don't know. But some of the things got enshrined as sort of the permanent hallmark writing rules, things like show, don't tell, and so on. And so those are interesting to pick at, both because they do encode some important knowledge and wisdom about common mistakes, and also they can be confining if taken as gospel because they often are sort of they tell part of the story. They like, I mean, show, don't tell being a great example, which we don't have to rehash, but it's like, very often you want to tell, don't show. Like it really depends what you're doing. It's just that there's a common beginning writing mistake that show, don't tell steers away from, but it's a very blunt way of putting it, right? Because it's like basically saying use one half of your arsenal, which is only a good idea if you've been underusing the other half and not if you haven't. So, it depends what you're doing. So anyway.
So there are a couple of these that I do talk about with my students quite a bit. So I think I'm going to propose, I'd like to talk today about said bookism, and I think Tom Swifty goes with that. And then the idiot plot and the second order idiot plot.
Uh-huh.
So those I mentioned, and as you know, Bob, those three, and I guess as you know, Bob goes with infodump. So those three topics is my suggestion for where we start, and we might add more if we go through them quickly. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yes, indeed. Those tend to be I feel like those are the ones that are the most still alive, along with perhaps Eyeball Kick.
Yeah,
And some of them would be, some of the other ones are probably still interesting to talk about, but maybe don't go under these names anymore. But in any event,
So I'm just going to dive in. Said bookism, right, this comes up with my students often. They define it as an artificial verb used to avoid the word said. And what I would say is what they say. I probably got it for them. Said is one of the few invisible words in the English language. It's almost impossible to overuse. People, when you're reading, people don't notice said. Yeah. They will notice He retorted, she inquired, he ejaculated. It's a particularly bad one. Interestingly, this bit I didn't know, the term said book comes from certain pamphlets containing hundreds of purple prose synonyms for the word said, which were sold to aspiring authors from tiny ads in American magazines in the pre-World War II era.
Yeah.
And then the Tom Swifty, and I will pause here to admit freely my great love for Tom Swift children's books, which I consumed voraciously along with, Nancy Drew, etc. Like it was all that kind of like those little hardcover adventure stories, right? That I read at the same time around age 10, maybe. Tom Swifty is an unseemly compulsion to follow the word said with a colorful adverb, as in we'd better hurry. Tom said swiftly, right? Which was a standard mannerism of the old Tom Swift adventure dime novels. Good dialogue can stand on its own without a clutter of adverbial props. And I particularly like that one because that one I'm a little tempted by as a writer. Sticking in the little adverbs. I often do write them and then have to go back and make myself cut them out. So, and like say, is it stronger without it? It's stronger without it. Even uses of, this is not the same thing, but related, like, the princess was very sad, right?
I think that's weasel words. I don't know. Do they call that weasel words in this text? That's what
I don't know.
That's the traditional name for it. We can just make that an honorary.
Okay.
Those three could go in the same category: said book, Tom Swiftiness, and weasel words. Yes,
it's all the same issue, right? You are, in some sense, it's all like a lack of confidence in your dialogue as a writer, so that you are kind of trying to overdetermine the reader's response to the dialogue by saying they're almost like stage directions, right, to the reader. Like you should take this as being very emotional. You should take this as being said really quickly. That's important as a way to convey the urgency of the dialogue. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So here's the thing. I think it's this is a perfect example of one of those Turkey City rule. I feel the same way about this as I feel about many of the other ones, which is that is a thing you could scribble on many beginner manuscripts, which would immediately improve their quality because it would steer people in what is very roughly defined the right direction. So if if the target is people who would be likely to pepper the page with adverbs, then that remains an evergreen corrective to a early writing, cop out, anxiety, whatever, right? Laziness. It is, again, potentially overly confining.
Sure.
So because particularly there is this hatred of adverbs, and it's like this particular. We have these literary styles and fads, and the reason that the generation that wrote the Turkey City Lexicon was scoffed at, flowery adverbs and fancy synonyms for said was that was an affectation of a previous wave of styles where people would, would use this kind of flowery language. And, Turkey City Lexicon is sort of like the sort of Hemingway-esque spareness of language is percolating down into the genre world, and we're not going to overindulge. But that's one way to
No, I mean,
right? Slice the loaf. I think that I would say to reflect on my own praxis. Adverbs get a bad rap, not entirely unjustifiably, because adverbs are maybe the least load bearing of the parts of speech, right? They're sort of just floating out there, modifying the whole sentence. Yeah.
Can I pause and give an example for the listeners?
Sure.
Just this is the one I use. So Le Guin has an exercise in Steering the Craft called Chastity, which I love the name of the exercise. And it's to write a page of descriptive prose with no adjectives or adverbs. And it is the exercise my students hate the most. It's very difficult to do. It is, even if they're writing one paragraph, and it's torture, right? Watching them sit there, trying to write descriptive prose without adjectives or adverbs. But the example I give them is, just to get them started, is you can say he ran. If you want something stronger, he ran across the Arctic tundra, right? The thing is emerging from the ice, etc. He ran across the Arctic tundra. You could say he ran quickly across the Arctic tundra using an adverb to intensify, or you could say he raced across the Arctic tundra.
He bolted, he fled.
Using a stronger verb. And so I'm just mentioning that because my students are often like a little lost when I ask them to get rid of the adverbs.
Right. And that is the point. That is the point, is that there was there's a fascinating New York Times little video story on the app. If you're reading the New York Times, they have these things where they have little clips integrated in the articles.
Okay.
Now, like doing multimedia articles about Taylor Tomlinson, a great stand-up, refining a bit, like a specific bit about her telling. And it was fascinating to me because I realized how much stand-up comedy, where you don't have that much time, it's almost poetry in the sense that, like, if you take out a syllable, it can change the laugh. You know, if you it's also in terms of like the delivery, like the intonation, like what word to hit. And you can see her fiddling with these little they sort of are recording the same bit show after show, and she starts by, you know, telling about this funny bit with this friend who called her and told, you know, she was having some conversation with a friend about the friend's husband. But it was sort of, she's getting laughs, but they're kind of too slow. They're not compact enough. The energy is flagging. So she like both makes it more vivid, where she gives them names, and she changes. It's a real friend. It's a real conversation, but she changes the friend's husband's name because it doesn't play well on stage. His name is like, I don't know, some 3-syllable name, and she makes it like Chad because she needs the punch. You know what I mean? It's like on the level of the individual word and the language. And she's irritated at one point because she's saying fucking about the laugh is the swear word. Like she's using the swear word, and that releases the tension. And she's like, I want to get the laugh without so she figures out a way to rearrange it so she can take out the cheap trick of using the swear word and just like it actually has to do with rhythm, where she's like entering the phrase and then slows down on one word, and she gets the same laugh that she would if she said fucking whatever. So it's that kind of thing where it's like there is an economy of speech. The thing about he fled across the ice versus he ran swiftly across the ice is that you just one word is often better than two, because instead of having two, you have a sort of a colorless verb, and then you're trying to pump it up with an adjective. It's like, you know, injecting some kind of, you know, flavoring additive, you know, instead of a rich and resonant verb. Sure. Right.
But, and the verbs like he fled across the ice and he raced across the ice mean different things, right? That's going to tell you a little bit about maybe the character, the situation, you know, et cetera.
Exactly. Yeah, you're packing it like ran is a very generic verb, and if you're judicious about the use of the verb, you can cast a whole penumbra. You can tell a whole story.
Oh, what a nice use of penumbra. Go on.
Speaking of which, I mean, and it's you know, obviously it's going to vary a lot, and it's going to depend on taste. And if you do too much of that, like if you there's always too much of a good thing. If you do too much of this, evocative, deep, you know, first of all, you can slow things down and tire the reader out, and second of all, you can make it more of an acquired taste. If they got to look up words if you throw in penumbra in every sentence, you know, it becomes either sort of self-mockery.
You could have said shadow, Ben. Right?
Yeah, sure. Penumbra's better, but it's cutting down the.
Well, you know, it's one of the things. Like I sometimes think, like, you know, Marianne, you're not Nabokov. you know, like Nabokov can do it. Nabokov. I mean, I'm not Nabokov, but like now, I'm not saying I couldn't be. If that was my goal, maybe I could be. I don't know. But Nabokov actually like can use all of the rich, powerful language balanced amazingly well in what is not even his first language. It makes me crazy.
Sure. And I don't know. I'm not. I understand what you're saying when you say the phrase "I'm not Nabokov." I also sort of want to call it into question, because it is, you know, that refers back to when we had the Call of Smirp episode. We were talking about the XKD, or on the previous episode, we were talking about the XKDC comic where he's like, making new words is bad, right? Where it's like, you know, there's a graph of like new words made versus, it's like making new words bad writing unless you're Tolkien or Shakespeare or Uncle Nash, or, you know, then there's a long list, and it's like, well, that's cheating. You know, if somebody's going to go, like, what if you want to be? Are we telling people not to be that? I mean, it's just sort of similar. It's like, you can, but you have to know what the effect is. Like, and I have a lot of stories that are like over-egging the pudding with outrageous, like, words like penumbra, but often to comic effect. I mean, Sense and Sensibility, my story Sense and Sensibility is sort of like, that's part of the whole gag.
Sure.
And that story is honestly the kind of thing where there was a round table at one point about my collection from, I think, Neil Harrison and Abigail Nussbaum and a bunch of people. And they like predictably, this always happens with every review of my correction, they completely disagreed about which stories they liked. And like often, so at some point they eviscerated literally every story in the collection because there was one that everybody hated. Each person hated different ones. And each person found different ones sort of the redeeming. But anyway, but Sense and Sensibility, very, very clearly a story that just appalls and revolts many readers. They have my every sympathy, but is a kick if you want to play along with that game. The richness of the language is can either be repelling or intoxicating, right?
Yeah.
Like when you venture away from sort of the simple, like what people misleadingly call transparent prose, which of course is, that's there's a lot going on to make prose feel transparent. But if you go away from, if you're calling attention to the language rather than making it, attempting for it to be invisible, right, then that is a risk, and you're going to provide both pleasures and displeasures.
Yeah, I didn't, by saying I'm not Nabokov, sometimes that's not my project, and I'm not interested in doing that work at any length, I think. Like when I'm writing a poem, I might, right? But it's exhausting for me. Like I get to the end of the page and I'm like, all right, I'm done with that.
I mean, and that's perfectly fair. Like this isn't my project. But anyway, the thing I was going to say about thinking about actually where to break this rule, right? First of all, I just want to rehabilitate, as much as it can be a handy rule, I just feel like smacking down the notion that adverbs are somehow universally bad. Like that seems like a very weird position to take. It's literally a part of speech, right? Yeah. And indeed, if you look at the best writing, I mean, like one would, if you had to make a candidate for some of the best first sentences of any book in the English language, I feel like Pride and Prejudice would be up there, and it absolutely hangs on the adverb, right? Right. It is a truth universally acknowledged. Universally, it does not work without universally.
I know.
You cannot remove. An adverb properly deployed is a beautiful thing, and there are times said is invisible. Actually, the only time said isn't invisible, I think, and this just may be my pet peeve, the only time said is not invisible is when it should be asked. Said and asked as a pair are invisible if used properly. Sometimes people say a question and I'm asking a question?
I agree with you. Yeah, I'm with you.
But said or asked, a pair used properly, are practically invisible. And sometimes you don't even have to tag. Sometimes you can go without a speech tag entirely. It's a sign of the strength. It's a sign of both the strength of your writing, but also in a way the stylizedness of your characters. Like if Jane Austen's minor characters are talking, she would never have to say said and give the names, because you would always be able to tell who was talking just because they're all such types, right? Which is sort of in tension with having round characters who could surprise you, right? Like it's because they're such caricatures on some level. Not caricatures, that's unfair, but broad types in the direction of characters,
right?
Like Mrs.
The mother
Bennett and so on. But sometimes you do want the verb to stand out. Sometimes you do want to call attention to the verb. Sometimes you do want she spat. And that is and I don't know that you always have to have the she spat be inside the dialogue. You know what I mean? It might be that those things are balanced against each other, right? Like no, I mean,
I agree. I think Le Guin's chastity exercise is an exercise. She doesn't say then write the story this way. She says, do this, make yourself aware of what you're doing, and then I'll give you your adverbs back. You can have them back. And it's coupled
with the being gorgeous exercise, which is another of her, which is just like use ornate language. So I mean, definitely as a way of flexing muscles, it's good. Like chastity is a great name for it. Like chastity and exuberance are restraint and exuberance are both things to practice. Okay, so I don't think we disagree about any of that.
No, I think we're on the same page. So we go on to idiots.
Indeed.
Okay, so I will acknowledge here that idiot, along with terms like crazy, etc., are
ableist.
Ableist terms. So
sure.
But
we might need a new name for that, since this document was.
I feel like I am less troubled by idiot because it is it's almost a historical term at this point in the way that it was used in disability things. Like we don't make kids sit with the dunce cap on their heads anymore, and we don't. But that's
I
kind of
I don't know.
Separate,
I think it's an objectionable word. I prefer the word fool to the word. I intentionally avoided idiot in The Unraveling.
Yeah.
Precisely because both from not just from a political point of view, like I don't want to trigger somebody who whatever has been hurt by this use of language, but also not just that, but also as a world building stance, because there isn't the same, because the setting precludes the notion. It isn't the kind of variance that they would demonize, right? Like, and so fool is different, because I mean, I think if you think about sort of the underpinnings of the word, an idiot can't think and a fool won't think. A fool is fooling around. An idiot is congenitally incapable of thinking as you demand that they do. A fool is someone who suffers from the moral lapse of refusing to engage seriously with the thing. You know what I mean? And they also have different social contexts, because an idiot, if you go back in time to a time when people are literally being called idiots, not just figuratively, that means they're going to be institutionalized and right. Whereas a fool is sort of like, that sounds to me like it may also be oppressive, but it's sort of like a more of a medieval term where it's like a holy fool. Like there's a place in society for this person's behavior which doesn't fit the norm. We've created a separate category for them to live inside of, essentially. It's like, it's a profession.
I love the way you use it in your novel. I think it's very specific to your novel and your world building. So,
but I mean, obviously the world building piece is unique to the novel. But the general idea, but it's connected to the fact that I guess I'm just saying I think it is a slur. You know what I mean?
I do think it's a slur. I think I was just. I personally would not use fool as a replacement for it, because fool to me carries all those medieval jester connotations, right?
Yeah, so I think it's very different.
It's a very different role. So
I don't think you can. I'm absolutely saying you can drop them in, because I don't think people do call each other fools in the same way. If you're writing naturalistic dialogue set today, fool would sound odd. I was more saying if you're inventing the world, consider having a world that has fools and not idiots. But if you're in our world today, you have to think about whether your use of slurs is. I mean, I don't think you should never use slurs.
Yeah. So
I think that you have a responsibility to the people who might be harmed by your using the slurs, right? And I think it's a kind of violence. You're performing a kind of violence, and that makes sense if justified. I feel like there's a lot of I think there's some slurs you shouldn't use. But, it depends. There's a ratio, right? It's a spectrum. It's not just like there are banned words and allowed words. It's like there are words that you have to have a hell of a good reason. And then
I feel like this is maybe a topic.
A different topic?
A totally different topic. Yeah. And like we can do an episode on this. I think it's an interesting
topic. I thought that was the first thing you wanted to say about idiot plot was about the word idiot. But let's move on to...
Well, I just wanted to bracket that. I wanted to bracket and acknowledge it, because I'm going to keep using the term. So I'm going to read the definition. And here, so I would say they are using it in the sense of lacking mental capacity, right? A plot which functions only because all the characters involved are idiots. They behave in a way that suits the author's convenience rather than through any rational motivation of their own, which I think is interesting, right? It is not just that the characters are inherently lacking mental capacity. It's that the author has made them lack mental capacity and not think about this because it's convenient for the writer, right? So...
but I actually disagree. I don't want to drag it back to the slur thing, but I disagree that they're using this as a generically neutral term for lacking mental capacity. I actually think it only makes sense I actually think the Turkey City Lexicon usage of it only makes sense as an insult. If they literally are thought through the implications of these characters truly, like they would not use this for a story in which all the characters have Down syndrome. Like that would not make any sense. That would be a very interesting story and would not have the flaw that they think. They actually mean idiot in the sense of the I'm mad at you sense of idiot. I'm mad at you because you did a dumb thing. Not in the sense that like these characters, do you know what I mean? Like the character is presented as smart and yet doesn't do the obvious thing. That's what they're saying. They're not saying you've written a story in which there's a character who wouldn't have the mental capacity to realize that they should call the police at this point. You're writing a story where it's presented as if they absolutely would call the police, and they're just not, and you're yelling at the screen, you idiot, call the police. That is the use.
Yeah, okay, so I don't think we're disagreeing again, but I just like it's in a horror movie, right? When all the, you're in the house and something scary happens and somebody says, let's split up and investigate. And you yell at them, don't be idiots, right? You mean don't be stupid, right? You're making a dumb choice here. And you're making a dumb choice for so I don't know. I think that is kind of, it's not that they are lacking mental capacity in the sense of inherently. It's more like they're not using the mental capacity they have, maybe more what you're saying. But they're doing that because it's convenient to the writer or the filmmaker or whatever else, right? Because it would be, if they all stuck together, then they wouldn't get picked off one by one, right? So anyway, that's the idiot plot. And the science fiction one.
As a sidebar, I don't actually know in a dangerous situation if you should stick together. Like, it's definitely a convention of cinema, and definitely when people split up, you're like, this is a horror movie, don't you? And it's a joke in like the Scream franchise that there's genre savvy characters who are like in a horror movie, but in a real dangerous situation, I think maybe you should split up. Anyway.
You're not going to be in my party, but anyway, going on.
If there's a shooter, if there's a shooter in the building and I'm with my kids, I am definitely not like, let's all stay together. I'm like, I will distract him. You go over there. Like, you head north, you head south. One of us will survive. Anyway,
that is actually not. That's not what you're supposed to do, having been through active shooter training at the school.
Perhaps.
So yes, I think you're proving the point in some sense. Like, that's people's instincts are bad in this situation,
okay.
But in those situations, and in fact, that's what happens in the movies. The reason they can get away with it in the movies is because people's instincts are bad, and many people would do that, but it is not optimal survival strategy. Generally.
Okay.
So second order idiot plot, to drag us back to this, is a plot involving an entire invented SF society. I think it could also be fantasy, which functions only because every single person in it is necessarily an idiot. Right. So I think it's just a useful term for science fiction people to kind of be aware of.
I mean, we should replace the term. We should not actually use the term.
It's a useful concept to be aware of. Like, if your book only works because, everyone on the planet is ignoring the obvious solution, then your book doesn't work. Right?
Okay, I'm going to say something that you may. I'm going to say something you may never forgive me for.
Mm-hmm. But this is where the podcast ended. Go on.
This is where the podcast ended. But like, the obvious example of a second order idiot plot is Star Trek teleporters. Like, and also the other obvious counterexample for how you can have a successful franchise that clearly, right? Like, I guess there's a lot of traditional hand waving that make all the obvious things okay, but it's like,
I don't think
or the holodeck, if you will. No, but I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's lots of things where it's like, I know that I am intensely frustrated, but most science fiction consumers are not, by worlds that do not hold up on close examination because people ought to be able to clearly, do you know what I mean? Like, they ought to be able to.
But you're talking about tech things, right? I don't think this convention is
but when
about
the second order idiot plot, when they're talking about a world in which everyone would have to.
In which every single person is an idiot. It's about the people. It is not about
No, it would have to be an idiot for the society to function. Not that they functions only because. That is to say, a world in which, if you have a society in which everybody could easily live forever, but they just forget to, like, it doesn't seem to occur to them. That's what they mean. They mean something in which they're talking about the world building. They're not talking about the society only. They're talking about a society which only works if people don't think rationally the way they would in a normal society. In the second order one.
I don't understand your connection here to the teleporters. I don't get it at all, actually.
Okay, I guess what I'm saying is like,
what's wrong with the teleporters?
It's more like there are so many cases in which you could solve the problems that are being presented. In many, this is not unique to Star Trek. There are lots of cases where it's like, you could solve all of these problems by using the tool that we already know that you have.
So you're talking about like the cell phone problem. Then,
yes.
Right. So let's take it out of Star Trek. We don't need to insult Star Trek here. Well, so it's a cell phone problem, right? That is once you have cell phones, many murder mystery plots fall apart, right? Because
I think that is a related thing.
And so you've got to get rid of the cell phone somehow in order to.
Yeah. So you have to constantly have your if you introduced a magical device that solves all kinds of problems, and then in the next episode you have other problems you don't want them to be solved with the same device, so you have to mysteriously have the device break or have it be an exceptional case where it's like, oh, this is didn't you read the manual? It never works on this kind of problem.
And I'd also say it's also like that's kind of interesting because it's not even really just a tech thing. It's also the mother problem with like children's lit, right? You have to get rid of the mothers to be able to have the adventures, right? So
yes.
the beginning of the fairy tale always kills off the mom, right? And so because the mom would not let the kid go off on these adventures, but
the beginning of the modern 20th century Disneyfied fairy tale, like the real fairy tales.
No, the real fairy tales. What are you talking about, Ben? Like the real fairy tales absolutely kill off the mother as the first thing, right? Cinderella has a stepmother because her real mother,
sure,
would not have done this, and
if you want to,
and like Hansel and Gretel have a stepmother, and like all like that is absolutely.
I think those stories are about like children in terrible abusive situations, and the useful shorthand they have for that is the stepmother. I think it's a very modern gloss to be like, we want the kids to have fun adventures, so we'll get rid of the mom and have it's like those are not in the original versions. They're not having fun adventures, they're being traumatized. Mother wants to kill them. That's not that's different than the Wrinkle in Time kind of thing where it's like, mom's been kidnapped, we need to go save her.
Well, that's not fun adventures. In Wrinkle in Time, the father has been kidnapped, yes, right? The mom is at home trying to hold down a science job and raise the kids, and scrambling. And
there's a convention
and then it's terrifying when Meg has to go and save her dad, right? Like it
sure.
is absolutely, like it's. I don't know. This is a big segue. This is. I don't know. This is a whole side thing, but I think we may actually have hit something we disagree on. So
I don't know. I'm just, whatever. I think it's a spectrum. I guess I'm just saying. I don't know. Maybe I'm just quibbling. To get back to your main point, which is okay. So we have a chain of topics. We have a plot that doesn't work because people don't do the obvious thing, the kind of thing where you're screaming at the screen.
Yeah.
I think that has different variations because if you're right that the natural thing for people to do is not the right thing for people to do, like in the horror example, mm-hmm. then that isn't quite the same thing, right? So that's one case is I, as expert or a genre savvy person, know that but it's actually not at all implausible because they're doing the natural thing for humans to do, but I have special knowledge. But I think the more common thing is where you're just irritated at a plot hole in a thing where you're like, why didn't they just do X? Why didn't they just call the cops? Why didn't they just admit it? Why didn't they just, So
that wraps me back around to Austen and Pride and Prejudice, which is what I usually talk about when I talk about the idiot plot. Because, a poorly executed idiot plot is one where the reader sees the holes and is frustrated, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's going to be, you don't want to do that as a writer generally because it's distracting from your actual project, right? So mm-hmm. that's where I'm going to say, like, that's something to fix. That's something to bring up in workshop, to realize like, oh, everyone's getting irritated by this and I really want them to concentrate on the virtues of heroism or whatever. And so I have to address that. Okay. The Austen. So I don't love Pride and Prejudice. My Austen is Sense and Sensibility. I mm-hmm. adore Sense and Sensibility, but we're not going to talk about that or about Emma Thompson, who is one of the loves of my life. But, putting those aside, and like Hugh Grant is almost good enough for her in that movie. And I'm like, all right. So putting all of that aside, Pride and Prejudice is entirely dependent as a romance on the protagonists being idiots, right? But that is the point of the book. So that's why she pulls it off, is because she, has, and whether you're talking about the original or whether you're talking about, what's her name? The blonde in the series of remake movies.
Clueless?
No,
that's Emma. Clueless is Emma.
The diary.
Bridget Jones.
Bridget Jones's Diary, right? Like the point at the beginning is that they are terribly flawed. That mm-hmm. and this is very much the romance novel point, is that they are terribly flawed, and that over the course of the novel, they realize the ways in which they have been idiots. They have been, behaving foolishly, perhaps. And they grow and they become better people and they earn their happy ending. Is, often in a romance novel, you have an external conflict and an internal conflict, and the characters have to grow to become worthy of true love. That's a pretty common trope. One of the reasons I like Sense and Sensibility is that there is a real external reason that is keeping them apart, that matters, that is serious, that has social consequences, that is, whereas in Pride and Prejudice, it's a little bit of comedy of errors, misunderstanding, someone says something a little over the top and the other one gets horribly insulted by it, kind of thing. And I'm like, if you guys just sat down like adults, you could fix this 20 pages in. And in Sense and Sensibility, it would not fix it 20 pages in if there was a real problem that had to get resolved, right? So
yeah, I see what you mean about the difference between an external and an internal problem.
Yeah.
I also kind of agree about Pride and Prejudice. What's interesting is there's sort of three categories, right? One of which is personal flaws, one of which is true external circumstances, like you may not marry or you will lose the farm or whatever. And then there's a middle category, which is heavily employed in rom-coms and plots in general, which is like missing information, right? Or false conclusions. I am not actually sure. There are plenty of rom-coms that completely live in the territory of like personal flaws. I don't actually know that I think Pride and Prejudice is one of them. I think that we know as romance readers that we are reading a romance and we are predetermined. We know Darcy is the right one. And so from our perspective as people implicitly rooting for them to get together because for extra textual reasons, we know what's going on. We are like in the horror movie shouting at the screen scenario where we're like, oh, come on, just sit down and work it out. But honestly, if you were, in fact, in real life, not in a book, Lizzie Bennet and Darcy's acting like that, that would be a red flag and you would be well advised to keep the fuck away from him. Like there's no actual it's not like, oh, come on, any reasonable observer would conclude that Darcy was just a man with a troubled past. No, a reasonable observer would conclude that he was probably not boyfriend material, right?
Yeah.
That is not a mistake that she is making. That is like an excellent judgment call based on the information she has available, right? And of course, it's also about her pride, right? It's also about she's quick to leap to conclusions about him, etc. There are some comical... The misunderstandings are played up by their personalities and weaknesses, but it's not like an obvious slam dunk case where you're like, if the two of them would just talk it out, like, they don't actually have that bad communication. They just...
Yeah, I mean,
appropriately suspicious. They are appropriately suspicious, right? It's also an environment in which there's a lot at stake, right?
Yeah.
She might well be trying to marry him for his however many pounds a year.
I like Pride and Prejudice. I'm not saying it's a bad book.
No, I'm not defending the book. Let me categorize.
Say, Pride and Prejudice fans, please do not come after me. I know your numbers are legion.
The Janeites are coming for you.
I just want to say, like, I have the tea towels with Pemberley on them. Like, so I'm
that's
not.
Right. You're never going to get a promotion in the World War I era British Army now, according to Rudyard Kipling. You fucked with the Janeites.
Did he really say that? That's
oh my God, there's this amazing story, the Janeites. Have you ever read it?
Oh no, I don't know that.
Oh, it is the funniest thing. It is a great Rudyard Kipling story, which is all about these partly like traumatized, shell-shocked World War I soldiers. And basically it's about all these officers who are like totally, super fans of Jane Austen.
Oh my God,
and how I
have to find that. I haven't heard about that.
It's kind of like the secret.
That's awesome.
And these guys stumble upon it. These sort of enlisted men stumble upon the fact that their officers are super Jane Austen fans, and they can kind of get away with everything if they bone up on the. I think one of them charges the other one like 25 pounds. He's like 25 pounds for the secret, and he keeps feeding him Jane Austen books and whatever, so he can get up. And so then he can all of a sudden the colonel's his best friend because. He knows which Jane Austen jokes to make. Anyway, it's a very funny,
I have not run across it. I've now looked it up and I will read it. It's called The Janeites. Okay,
yeah,
awesome.
It's pretty.
Right.
It's hilarious.
Sorry. I just go on with what you were saying before.
I guess I think it's interesting to categorize. I think this notion of it that they're gesturing at with the idiot plot. I think there's. Again, as with all the Turkey City things, there's a good kernel there where they're saying, don't get so excited about what you want to have happen that you leave some glaring, that the reader is going to experience it as the characters acting in a way where the heavy hand of authorial convenience is having them do something that makes no sense or miss something that they would think of. Like, you're breaking, to some extent, the suspension of disbelief if you have the characters act in a way that... So that's the kind of overarching thing.
Right.
And then there's a bunch of subdivisions of that, right?
Before you go on, I would say, like, part of why that bothers me so much, and it does bother me a lot, is because characterization is often the heart of fiction for me.
Yeah.
And like, like the part I care the most about. And so, like, I will forgive you a lot of other clumsy things, but if you mess with the characterization,
right. Which is why you don't mind the second order idiot plot as much, because the idea that this technology would not be used in that way unless everyone were, that they would not neglect to use a technology in an obvious way does not bother you as much, because that's not really a flaw of characterization. But it's worth unpacking what they mean, and to some extent, I really do think this. I really do think this question of, like, what do they mean by idiot? Because honestly, the more we talk about it, the more I think they just mean someone you're mad at. No, I really rigorously mean they mean someone you're mad at, not someone who can't think or someone who's right. Because precisely, I think Jane Austen fans who are like, why doesn't she just talk it out with Darcy, are not doing the thing where they're like, to some extent, if you're reading Pride and Prejudice with an overdetermined sense that this is a romance novel, you are in some ways, do you know what I mean? Like there's the writer could be like, I want this to happen, so I'm going to force the characters to do it.
Right.
Or the writer could be writing what the characters actually really would do, but you don't like it because you've decided that the characters should do a thing. You know what I mean? Like, and so in a way, it's like, we already knowing that they're perfect for each other, they seem like quote unquote idiots. That is to say, we're annoyed at their at all the way, intentionally she's raising the attention by annoying us. But that can be for some readers too much, where you're like, ugh. And in some other works, it does seem like there's just a lot of like, Connie Willis called it the delayed fuck in talking about rom-coms. Like, all the things, like, essentially you have the characters with a strong attraction, you want them to get together, and then there's a million things that come up in their way, like all the, which can go to the extent of like external things, scribble comedy things, or can be sort of like these, interlocking patterns of their personalities or whatever. And it can feel forced.
Yeah. I mean, I will defend, I guess, Elizabeth Bennet's let me, I have more trouble with Darcy, but, Elizabeth, I think, what works for me about the way she reacts to Darcy, character-wise, has to do with Mrs. Bennet, right? And because Mrs. Bennet, I feel a little protective of Mrs. Bennet, right? Because Austen writes her as this ridiculous character, right? And Elizabeth and her father mock the mom, and right, it's absolutely mean. It's very mean, and Elizabeth feels very ashamed of her mother, and that sets her up to overreact to Darcy, right? And her pride gets stung, I think, in part because she's already feeling shame, right? She's already like, my family is so embarrassing, and now Darcy has seen, and he comments on Mrs. Bennet, right? Darcy has seen how ridiculous my mother is, and it reflects on me. And so that, to me, that seems like a very real family dynamic in a way that makes sense. And I'm kind of irritated with Elizabeth in part because, I mean, Mrs. Bennet is right. Her family and her daughters are in a very economically precarious situation, right? And she may not be going about it very well, and she may be clumsy about it, but it is critical to their future to get these girls married safely, right? Like, which is what the whole end of the book is about, right? Like, and, like, they are almost ruined, right? Because people were not taking, and including Mr. Bennet. And I think Austen is very clear on this, that Mr. Bennet, who is set up at the beginning as being a, he's the sensible dad who, like, is not foolish, has been the greater fool because he has let his young, 15-year-old daughters run around with soldiers and has almost destroyed them all in the process, right? And so, anyway, and he's ashamed at the end, like he.
Sure. I buy that. What is this? Willoughby? There's the lecher, and he, who runs off with the younger daughter, and that puts them all in peril, and that, he was wrong, and she was right about this threat. I think there's a way in which to say that she's just right, though. I feel like Austen is really... I think one of the things that makes Austen great is that Austen is of two minds, and she sets up these hypothetical experiments because she is honestly, in some ways, ambivalent about she's Eleanor and Marianne, right? She's in some sense both unwilling to discard the ideal of companionable love, right? Of love that is somehow like this connection between souls, and also unwilling to privilege it over like the nuts and bolts pragmatism of survival in a ruthless world, right? And so she writes herself all these stories which end up having happy endings in which the characters who act right, but she dramatizes that struggle in a lot of different ways. And the thing is that, both Darcy and Elizabeth are in this situation, which is not... It is very high stakes, and they should not assume that the motives of any other parties that they encounter at this ball are like, both of them, in fact, have a secret commitment to like an ideal of love as a relationship between equal human beings who to happiness is really the 18th century way of thinking about it, right? And they both believe in that, but they are at a ball in a situation where they should by no means assume that that is the motivation of the people around them. And for Darcy is also not, he's wounded. It of course does have to do with his personality, where he's easily wounded and slighted and thinks that she's mocking him and whatever. But he is, he should also not be going in here with his guard down, ready to, do you know what I mean? Like it's a sort of a perilous situation for both of them. And also she's right, but the mom is right, but not right. The fact is that it is true that it is disastrous in this context to be whatever the youngest, whatever the youngest sister is, who runs off with Willoughby, she almost destroys the family. But to be Mary and just like be a spinster and not marry is not actually disastrous. It's 5 girls. They can float a spinster or two. Like, it is not actually the case. Her urgency to marry everybody off is in fact also poses a threat. There are two threats.
No.
Because there's a threat to...
Well, she's going about it wrong, right? I mean, she is
that's not just that she's going about it wrong. If we don't know we're in a romance novel, if we don't know extra-textually that there is a Mr. Right for Elizabeth, it is the case that perhaps Elizabeth should not marry. Perhaps Elizabeth should have high enough standards that she rejects all suitors. That is perhaps the correct thing for her to do. That actually won't bring financial ruin. It may be a toll, but it's not ruin. And it is privileging her interior life of the spirit, because Austen cares equally about the solving the marriage problem of like, how will they survive financially? She refuses to one of the things that makes her great. She refuses to discard that and be just like, she refuses to be some purely romantic. She's not the Brontes. She's not like, what does it matter if I have my true love? We can be ghosts together. Like, she's not willing to do that. But also, she's unwilling to be just like this ruthless pragmatist who's like, he's got £10,000 a year. I don't care if you like him, right? And to some extent, the haste to marry her, Elizabeth properly has to defend herself against the threat that her mother poses to her soul. Her mother is going to take care of her body. Her mother's going to take whatever it takes to take care of her physical being. But like, it might end up with her marrying someone who she will not have a true meeting of the minds with, which Elizabeth inconveniently cares about. It's inconvenient until it turns out Darcy cares about that too.
Yeah, I'll buy that. I have trouble investing in it because I just so dislike Darcy. So now the Janettes can come from me. I don't like Darcy. So I don't find...
If you don't like Darcy, then you don't think Elizabeth is being foolish to resist his, it's not even his advances. He doesn't make any advances.
Well, no, no, I don't think she's being foolish to resist them. But yes, I think that...
But I think Darcy, I don't.
Anyway,
I think they're both hurt.
I agree with you how it's set up. I agree
think your
with
analysis of how Elizabeth is hurt and how that sets her up to be suspicious is also true of Darcy. I think there's enough in his background to suggest that he expects to be miserable. He expects to be miserable.
Yes. I mean, so the part of why I don't like Darcy is that, and this is, I've been reading a lot of Russ lately because I'm working on this Russ essay.
Yeah.
And the ways in which Darcy is wounded and expects to be miserable and is so quick to believe that women are taking advantage of him are very gendered.
Sure.
In a way, and you're not a Star Trek person, but in Strange New Worlds, I recently rewatched the musical episode, Subspace Rhapsody. And I'm sorry, guys, this is going to be a mild spoiler, but Spock gets dumped and sings a song, I'm the X. Like he's searching for X, the formula X, but it's also a pun on I'm the X. And it's this like such a like, pity me. I thought I understood women. I thought she felt the same way I did. She's going off, like carefree, and I'm here broken and hurting. And that is often how Spock is written in fan fiction as well.
Huh.
And Spock and Darcy are of a type, right? Of a like the dark, brooding, wounded man who isn't in touch with his emotions, and but the right woman will eventually come along, or in slash
the
fiction,
right woman
the
being
right man
Kirk in this case.
Right. Could be Kirk. Could be the right man, but will come along and heal him and let him access his emotions so that he will be able to say something in a very stumbling, stuttering way once for the rest of his life. He'll never say anything like this again. And that will stand in for everything else. And I have no patience for it. I like that male, the way men are expected and allowed to be in that trope makes me
fume.
It makes me very angry because I think it's a cop-out. I think it lets men off the hook for having to work on their emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think glorifying it. I do think that's a very common trope in romance, that it's sort of like that is almost fetishized or like glorified.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm not sure that I would not blink an eye if you told me that is a flaw in 75% of Jane Austen fanfic. I don't know that it's a flaw in Pride and Prejudice because I don't know that we are necessarily encouraged to think that that's a thing about Darcy we should find desirable. I think there's an easy reading of the text, because in fact the idea that
what is it about Darcy that we find desirable?
That he, like Elizabeth, even though he's surrounded by this world which is, mercantile and pragmatic, that he in fact agrees with her about the purpose of life. Like that he in fact wants someone who is on his level. He in fact yearns for an equal partner with whom to have a communion of souls, instead of the kind of transactional relationship which they're embedded in. They're both like out of place in this society, which is obsessed with how many pounds a year you have and thinks that men and women are very different. He doesn't actually want a woman.
Okay, so he's a romantic. Does he have any other virtues? I'm sorry, I don't like Darcy. Maybe we should move on, because
I don't mean, when you say virtues, it's like that is a thing in it's like,
well, I just don't know why we like him. Like Edward Ferrars, I know why I like him, right? Like he is a stand-up guy who, even when even when his heart is breaking, he is trying to do the honorable thing, right? Like, sorry, Sense and Sensibility.
No,
so
I hear you.
Yeah.
Eleanor's guy.
Yeah. So
sure.
I'm like, what does Darcy do that's difficult for him? Where does he actually grow, aside from becoming slightly less of an ass? So all right. Anyway, we can maybe.
I mean, I think that's perfectly reasonable, but note that you are framing this, and it's appropriate because it's a romance book, but you are framing this as, why should he earn being an object of desire? Why should we vicariously through Elizabeth, long or lust for him? Like, which is fine. It's a romance.
Well,
but
I think the answer is only because the bar is set so low for men. I mean, so he manages to climb over the bar, but the bar is like down at your ankles.
But I mean, if you think that the book wants to position him as a dashing hero who is desirable, if that's then sure, then we've established a very low bar for being. But if they're just like two broken people who are humans, and the only reason that they should deserve love is because they're human beings, Do you know what I mean? And we're not actually valorizing any of his traits. We're just painting a portrait of them. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, why do you need everybody who finds love to be virtuous? Are the people whose flaws outweigh their virtues? Is it unjust for them to attain love? Do you know what I mean?
Well, by the rules of romance novels, I think so.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. That's why Austen was not necessarily. I think to some extent, like, yes, the trope you're complaining about is a trope which contributes to some toxic patterns and is perhaps endemic in romance. I'm not sure Jane Austen is guilty of it. She's before that. She doesn't know it's a trope because she's inventing it. Nobody's ever, I mean, not really, because there's like Anne Radcliffe or whatever, there was Gothic. And sure, maybe he's a riff on the Gothic, but it's not quite the same thing. She's actually, I think you can easily read Austen that she's just painting these portraits of these people. And it's not, if you read Pride and Prejudice as if it's not category romance, you know what I mean? And it's not predetermined that he's the one for her and that we should vicariously see him as the hero. And they're just two fucked up people who happen to both believe in, like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't excuse him being an ass, but it doesn't valorize him being an ass either. You know what I mean? It's necessarily. I don't know. It's been a long time since I read it, so maybe we. I may be off.
And I also kind of feel like I kind of want a woman to be defending Darcy in this conversation, right? Like, so.
I mean, am I defending Darcy? Because I don't think I'm actually uninterested in the project of defending Darcy, right? I'm actually defending Austen.
Yeah.
I'm only interested in the project of defending Austen. And I think that it's unfair to Austen to propose that Darcy is a hero.
Well, okay, now the Gen X can come after you. So I'm good with that. So, because they think that I think generally Darcy is seen as a hero. So,
I don't know that Jane Austen I don't know. Unclear. Anyway, whatever.
Yes. I don't know if Austen did. I'd have to go reread the book too. So,
I agree, and I do think I 100% agree with the analysis that what the trope that was spawned by Darcy, who gave birth to Rochester, who gave birth to like, I don't know, the fucking guy in 50 Shades of Grey, like emotionally unavailable, the fetishization of emotionally unavailable, cruel men's assholery, like as a masochistic way of like framing a romance. That sucks. I just don't think Austen had any idea that would be part of her legacy. I don't think that's what she's doing. Maybe she's guilty of it to some extent, but like,
I kind of think she is, but in any case.
Well, so I may be overstating the case. It's not that I don't think that. I do think Jane Austen thinks Darcy is sexy, but I don't know that she thinks he's a hero. Anyway, but where were we? Before?
Well, I think. Do we feel like we've resolved like idiot plot, second order?
So
idiot plot?
The thing I was going to say about idiot plot that I want to scale like to. I have one more example I wanted to mention about rom-com.
Sure.
I think it's interesting in this context. Have you seen Heartstopper?
Yes, and read the graphic novels.
The cool thing about Heartstopper is that precisely this trope of like, well, they don't really communicate and whatever is like 100% absent. They have the most. It's like hilarious how Heartstopper manages. I may have said this before. Heartstopper manages to, like, there are shows. Like, you know how in like a Tarantino movie or Game of Thrones or whatever, the movie will surprise you and keep you on the edge of the seat because it breaks the conventions by being worse. Like by like somebody just gets flat out murdered. You thought he was the hero and he gets murdered. Or like Euphoria will do that. It'll be just like darker than you expect. Heartstopper continually is surprising and fresh by being happier than you expect. Like and
I would actually season. And I'll put a couple other things into that category. The TV show Sex Education.
That sometimes
does a bunch. Sometimes not always. Sometimes they're like too embarrassed and teenagery to like say things and it causes problems. But they do more often than you would expect. Talk about things. The later seasons of Discovery and Strange New Worlds. And this is one of the reasons why I think they get a lot of pushback from more conservative communities. There is a lot of sitting around and talking about your feelings. In the middle of space battles and whatever else.
Right.
And they do a great job with it. And then the recent, I don't think this is a spoiler. I think everybody kind of knows the recent episode of Doctor Who where Ncuti Gatwa.
I don't know. It's a spoiler for me. I haven't seen the new Doctor Who.
You know that well, maybe
I know
you
that Nukudi is the 14th Doctor,
I think I'm saying it wrong. I think it's Shudi. Why he told me how to pronounce it, and now I've forgotten. So, but I think it's pronounced Shudi. But he. Well, I don't think this is a spoiler. Just, he's the 14th Doctor,
right?
And the Tennant comes back briefly.
Yes.
So, right.
We might spoil that for some people, but anyway.
Well, it was in it's in so many promos. It'd be hard to avoid at this point. But there is a transition moment. It's just kind of funny because he was in Sex Education, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, he has the same energy. And it's lovely. It's a very we're now going to talk about our feelings and how to heal from all this trauma, right? And it's just so I love seeing that shift in the TV landscape. I think the last few years there has been a lot more of that, and I think it reflects the new generation coming up. And
the thing I want to say about Heartstopper, which I think is not just they talk about their feelings, but it's also it's actually a clever play on tropes where you keep expecting, this is the kind of teenage show where now the entire plot is going to be revolved about this person being too embarrassed to tell this person, or they're going to pretend that this happens, and then they don't. They don't just completely talk to each other, and so it's more than just they're spending time on their feelings or something, or that there's a lot of communication, but it's it's delightfully trope breaking. It's delightfully surprising because they don't do these tired things. They find just much more interesting sources of conflict than anyway. So the thing about to get back to the idiot plot, the second order idiot plot, and all that, I do think that the thing that falls apart under examination in a way is the idea that what's happening here, it really is the case. There are lots of reasons you could be mad at the characters for not doing what you wanted when you were reading the book, and and be yelling at the screen that they're idiots, and those aren't all the same kinds of reasons. You know what I mean? And I do think sometimes we are mad at characters for acting like they're in the real world instead of in the kind of book we think we're reading. That's one subcategorization of things where it's they're not actually. Anyway, and then the other thing that you brought up, which I think is slightly different, is a way that books age in a way, the cell phone thing. And there's a lag time where we haven't, where it's there's a bunch of plots that evolved or instincts or more moves that we were used to having before cell phones. And then everybody had to relearn how to do those things before cell phones. And I will say, and then there's always going to be things like that. And I will say that I just finished reading Anne Leckie's Ancillary trilogy, which I love, and I'm super excited about, and I hope we'll have her on the show. But there is a way that you have now, compared to when the book came out, for the second book, you have to do a whole lot of in the background, hand wavy, moving stuff around for the plot to work, because we now know that deepfakes exist. Right? So it's a kind of situation where you have it's written in a world in which the fact that you've shown somebody footage of something means it happened, even though it's clearly these are very sophisticated AIs, and it's a situation in which if the AIs did have guardrails about this, they would easily be subverted. It's very difficult to believe that with all the taboos that the characters are willing to break, the one taboo they would not break is not to make a deep fake. So there's a way in which the whole, it's the cell phone plot thing. It's it's the fact, and that's going to be a whole new set of things where a whole lot of plots in which we present evidence of something to somebody. We have the film, we have the film plot. I've revealed that we've taped him doing it is perhaps going to fall apart in many cases, right? Or you'll have to do the battery died. You'll have to frame it in such a way that you have the pieces around where it's plausible that in this specific case, I didn't have any cell phone reception. We set it on an island with a cell phone. You have to do similar things where it's
And to be clear, that's been going on for a long time, right? Even in the era of before telephones, letters. Yeah. People had to write stories in which, the ship went down that was carrying the critical letter, right? That they of course would have written, right. But there was Right. So yeah, no, I
So
think
these are sort of patches for the, this kind of thing is like there's a sort of a sub sidebar here of like how to patch your idiot plot, which is to say, if there's something that a character
you can get away with like one ship going down. You can't get away with like all the ships going down.
I think it depends on how.
Unless you want to like, you might have to create a war or something.
You might have to do a bunch of you might have to have a whole series of fixes. And I mean, it's all in the a lot of it is focus, right? And a lot of it is, I mean, you might have to have a ship go down and a clock where there was no time for a second ship because the thing had to happen before the other thing. There's a certain amount of rigging to, and that's one thing to say is there's a certain amount of, I guess the takeaway is to look at the book through the eyes of the characters, right? Sort of like literally what, and also through the eyes of a reader savvy of the genre, because even though I don't like it, it is the case that there's an extra burden if you are writing a murder mystery. Like, even if the characters don't know that it's a murder mystery, the readers know it's a murder mystery. So if the characters act in ways which would be quite sensible in real life but are stupid in a murder mystery, like you're in some ways straining part of the fictional dream, because the reader is signed up. The contract is that they're signed up for a murder mystery, and if the readers are behaving in quite sensible but non-murder mystery compatible ways, you have the defense of realism, but it doesn't necessarily pass the test of like genre pleasure, right?
Right.
And which is interesting, because I find that a very interesting area, because of course at some point we have to push through the idea of what a murder mystery, like a lot of that is like readers being attached to conventions, and maybe we want to break those conventions. Maybe we want to insist on Mrs. Brown on a spaceship, right? Like that. Maybe it's like, it's a convention of science fiction that people don't talk about their feelings. It's like, well, until now, like at some point you have to throw down the gauntlet. But when you do that, you have to kind of have bought enough reader trust, or have enough, they have to have their cake or eat it too, or you have to wean them off the old thing. I don't know. There's something to negotiate there. Not that,
I want to throw two other things into the mix. So the second order idiot plot was making me really think about Ruth Anna Emrys and Half-Built Garden, because I think she does a great job of, here are the aliens, here's the problem, and here are multiple groups responding to it in ways that make sense within their cultural context.
Yeah.
And they may see each other as making ridiculous choices that make no sense. But as the reader, you get the insight into all of these different angles. And I think that's a really great way of handling this, and kind of like elevates the concept in a way. And then the other thing...
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the other thing that... Respond to that, and then I'll say the other thing.
Well, I mean, and that points, I think, to the role of like culture in this, and the role of like that. That's also why I want to dig into this term "idiot," where it's like you're shouting at the screen, but that's always so loaded. Like you are saying you are not acting the way I think people should, right? When you say this is an idiot plot, and it's like or it could also be a moral judgment where you're saying, how can I sympathize with a character who acts like this? Not I'm frustrated that they're not doing the obvious thing, but like, they're not acting, they're not the general, they're not acting the way I think they should. And that is both a thing where you have to bridge, but also there's some responsibility of the reader. I don't know, where it is legitimate, you have to carry it across, but it's legitimate to say, would they do that in this world? I just watched Dune 2. And I
haven't yet.
Well, it's hard to spoil Dune 2, because it's basically the same as the Frank Herbert book, although there are some changes, and particularly for everyone who was frustrated that Zendaya didn't have that much to do in the first movie, it is very satisfying that she essentially becomes the protagonist at the end of the second movie. It's you have to buy Frank Herbert's whole thing about why they're fighting with swords. There's lots of moments when it's not exactly clear why that works. But I think part of what allowed me to maintain suspension of disbelief at everybody fighting with swords, even though occasionally they like blow things up with artillery and whatever, but is that there's a certain way in which it is Herbert is asking you to imagine that this has sort of become stabilized at the point where, because of the technologies of shields and this and that, it's become the way people do things. And it's military doctrine, and it's what they're trained in, and so on. And so even when there's some opportunity for them to do something that we would think would be smarter,
Mm-hmm.
They are doing it partly because it is in fact a cultural norm, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so like maybe some people will think their way out of it, but
Yeah.
a lot of them are going to. Most of the time, people are following scripts
Yeah.
that they're
Yeah.
and doing what they're used to, and so there's a certain amount of, again, there's what would be realistic in the world, and then there's what the reader is expecting, and you kind of have to bridge that gap.
Right.
But it is possible to sell the argument to say, this is how people. A great example of that, swords in space, is Gideon the Ninth, where everybody has swords in space, and it's 100% not clear why, and it's awesome that it's 100% not clear why. That is actually a point where, just on, I don't like when things try to have logic and science be in the foreground, and then they try to rule of cool the parts that they like.
Yeah.
They've worked out a careful world, but then they do want this one thing, so they try to rule of cool that. They're like, but that's so cool, we're not gonna, don't think too hard about it. I hate that. But if the
Mm-hmm.
whole book starts from the premise, right? If we already start with Gideon having a sword and dirty magazines and necromancers and a spaceship, we have clearly, like, you know what I mean? Like, my expectations are set such that I can completely enjoy this. Of course, everyone fights with swords. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's no there, and I think there's a bit in the second book where somebody like makes fun
Okay.
of somebody for the idea of
So
using a
I
gun.
actually haven't. They're in my Kindle, but I haven't read them yet. So,
Okay. Well, there's a bit where I think somebody where it is sort of lampshaded, and that somebody like mercilessly ribs somebody for the idea of using a gun in a way that,
yeah.
just anyway. So it's anyway.
Okay. So I think we should start wrapping. Here's my
Yeah.
because I think the other topic we were going to cover today, which is info dump, I think is a big topic, and we should save that for
Sure.
a future episode.
Sure.
The last thing I guess I wanted to throw into this, I did come up with an example of a tech thing that bothers me in a, I don't even know. So the thing is channels of communication, right? So right now,
Mm-hmm.
last night I'm watching TV with my daughter, and we're sitting in front of a television. She is also texting with her friends at the same time. I am periodically going online and checking social media. And I sent a couple emails in that period.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's a tech that we have now, we've had for some time. I don't know how it's going to play out in the future. Like, it is exhausting, and maybe we're all going to just like give it all up. I don't know. But very little science fiction, in my experience, addresses it, right? That has like, and it's hard to write, but the idea, but even if you're writing mainstream lit, people I think are mostly not putting this into their fiction. The idea that you don't just get to represent the dialogue in the room, that there are multiple channels happening simultaneously.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Well, I think there's some lag, but I see it done more and more.
I mean, I've got a little bit of it in the novel. In one of my novels, I have, and I did have to come up with reasons why my main character is one who is not used to having a chip in her head. She gets it turned on partway through, and she is not using the channels fully in the way that people who are integrated to it are. And so she misses important pieces of information that she would have gotten earlier, and so on, right?
This reminds me of a critique for the guy who worked for Money, where in a first draft, I just kind of, I think, unthinkingly defaulted to like having something wrong with the main characters, like she has like in-eye heads up devices and whatever, and there's all this like sending messages in your brain kind of thing, and it's kind of like broken in the beginning, I think, just so I could default to like having everything happen in dialogue. And I think some critiquer was like, why that's kind of like a cop out. And I went back, and so I just, and it's honestly like, it's not that hard, like, you know what I mean? It did not make the story any worse to have but you
have to think to do it, and think about what the implications would be in terms of like.
Honestly, I think most of the dialogue in The Unraveling is probably over the feed. But
Yeah.
but
I mean, it can be really great. And I guess that's part of what I want to say is it can be a really great opportunity, right?
yeah,
When you look at this and you're like, okay, my character she's having a conversation with her wife about, whether they're going to be moving off planet in one of my stories, right?
yeah,
As the war is escalating. And if partway through that tense, relationship conversation,
hmm
she gets urgent pings from her sister saying, hey, you're supposed to be here taking your shift to take care of our mom. I got to get
right,
back to the kids, etc.
sure,
That can be great for escalating the tension and
sure.
complicating the situation, right? So I guess, like
I mean,
my
even to be fair, if she was having an important conversation in a Victorian drawing room, a page could enter and interrupt with an urgent note
right.
from across town, right?
Sure. Right. It's
Um,
not, but I guess all I'm saying is this is, I guess, to the writers, like that there's a temptation to simplify your job by,
mhm.
um, by removing the elements that are getting in the way of your story. Right. And
Right.
maybe by keeping them, you can look for opportunities well, this is like Heartstopper, right? You can look for
hmm
what can you do now? What can you do better if you keep
Yeah.
those efforts,
Yeah, and
right?
I think it is well, and I think also this is partly generational. It's hard for me to imagine. It's hard for me to imagine somebody. I mean, maybe I'm wrong because of course people learn on literature, and literature there's a lag time. But like, I feel like any writer who's in their 20s who's writing from life, not from literature. You know what I mean? Like
I see very little of it in my students.
interesting.
They are writing, and it's hard. I mean, I actually do think it's kind of hard, right? To like write multiple channels at once. Like
hmm
it's hard in the sense of like it's easier to write a 2-person dialogue scene than a 20-person dinner party scene, right? Like it's just it's there's a certain amount of technical skill that goes
I mean, one
into
concrete
managing all
technique I
that.
will say is so much of the unraveling is, of course, happening with multiple bodies in multiple places. There's
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of the dialogue is being sent in chat, and then in addition, there are actually multiple physical conversations happening in multiple places.
Right.
And just as a structural technique, I will
Yeah.
say that I often wrote them linearly. Like I often
Yeah.
wrote one complete conversation and then another complete conversation, and then interleaved them at dramatically appropriate moments, thinking like for comic effect often, like what would be the two. But I did actually compose them sometimes separately and then unite them. And it's also worth pointing out people's economy of attention, even if it's in their brain, even if you have a chip in your head, you clearly won't, if you have any ability to choose how the chip in your head works, which you might not if Elon Musk has
Mm-hmm.
programmed the chip in your head. But if you do, you will have some desire to have an economy of attention where you get to focus on certain things and not others, depending on what you want to think. And people do turn off their phones or like put them on
Right.
mute. And it's like so it. But I think it's more like if you unthinkingly just want to remove all that stuff because you don't want to deal with it. But like in a way, it's like if your character is in a modern kind of world in which such things exist, it is getting more under their skin and into their experience to really think about like
Yeah.
what decisions are they making about like, is this a conversation they don't want interrupted, in which case
Mm-hmm.
they take action to have it not, or is this an interruption that might intrude
Mm-hmm.
in a way that enriches the thing that's going on. It does feel like, I don't know, I also think shows are doing it better. Like there's almost like, I remember the first time that there were shows that had like the texts appearing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
now it's kind of a standard convention, the way it's done in like sort of sex education and a lot of shit where it's like there'll be like the text bubbles will be appearing on the side
Right.
and everything in a
Right.
way that's very sort of like, now that's almost like a standard cinematic language. I remember it being
Yeah.
an innovation and now being like, of course
Yeah.
the text are showing up in a little bubble on the side of the screen. Like that's how you do it.
Yeah.
It's like a pan or a
I mean,
close up.
sometimes, or like I'm watching. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Like Covey and I right now are watching Pretty Little Liars, which is from
Uh-huh.
several years ago, right? Like that's a
Yeah.
slightly older show, not
Yeah.
really old. And there's a lot of texting that's very important, and they hold the phones up and angled so you can read the text, but it's
Oh,
small. It's small and it's a little hard to read, and
yeah.
it's you've got to pay close attention. And I think Heartstoppers and so on, like that have the things popping up
Right.
is much easier to follow and much
Yeah.
easier to
That's
read.
almost like, and it's funny because it's initially like kind of cartoonish, but
But it is a little like I'm trying to think if there's a non-teen YA show that does that, and I'm not sure I've seen it yet, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But
I don't know. Yeah, I do
think
think
that's
I do think it's specifically a convention that has emerged in like
Yeah.
Teenage drama or whatever. But I would expect it to become more widely legible because of exactly what you're saying about the different channels of communication and like the cinematic language. It's like the idea of like the camera zooming into a screen so you can kind of read it strikes me as like, just kind of a pre-D.W. Griffith cinema where people are, you know what I mean? You haven't figured out the close-up yet, so you're doing kind of awkward things. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's just like
no. I agree. I think it's interesting. It does mean that like it's harder for me to like put shows on as background and like craft without looking at the screen. Like West Wing, I can just listen to West Wing. Gilmore Girls, I can just listen to.
That's interesting. And I mean, there's a 508 or whatever. Yeah. There's an accessibility issue there too, right? Because it's like you need a screen reader to process the show if it's doing that kind of stuff visually.
Yeah. So that's not everything needs to be geared to my sewing or crafting needs, but it is a different type of experience, I guess. If you were doing a radio play, you'd essentially have to have a narrator read the text, right? Like that would be another approach to it or something. I mean, if it's a science fictional world, you can also decide that it's all like audio text. You know what I mean? And actually, kids do send each other a lot of audio messages. Like that's another. Actually, I see texting happen in on screen, like in teen dramas. It's all texting. But in what I actually observe of my kids, people do they text when it's quick, but I find hilarious these asynchronous voice conversations where they record audio texts to send to each other at length. I wonder if that's more of a European thing because I haven't seen that in my daughter's circles, but yeah.
Funny about it is that I find it hilarious because it has it has certain characteristics of phone conversations and certain characteristics of text conversations. It's sort of like it would be rude to call someone on the phone and talk to them because you're demanding their synchronous attention. Like you have to either be very close, intimate friends, or it has to be important or something. There has to be the bar is higher. In my adolescence, we used to just call each other and spend all day on the phone, tying up the house line, right? Mm-hmm. Now not just never mind the house line, everybody has their own phone, but like the idea that you're demanding someone's synchronous attention, they have to be paying attention to you and not other things, is like a much higher social cost than it used to be, right? Because they have a million people they're texting with, and you're saying I'm the only one if we're talking synchronously. So there's this, but you could send them like an audio thing, and then that's like you're getting kind of, and that's easier for you to compose.
You get the nuance of voice,
and you get the nuances of speech and so on. But they can listen to it at leisure, and they don't have to respond immediately, so it's a little more polite than like actually calling them.
I love seeing how politeness has evolved. I was trying to explain this to who was I talking to on Facebook? Jonathan Strahan, maybe someone who's a few years older than me in the science fiction community. And I was trying to explain the moment when I understood why the pizza delivery people don't ring my doorbell. They text, right?
Because they don't want to interrupt.
They don't want to interrupt. And I actually had to have a slightly younger friend, like 10 years younger than me, explained it to me. And she was like, well, look, like, what if you have a baby? What if it's going to set the dog barking and wake somebody up? What if, like the doorbell is a very intrusive thing. It's going to set off a loud sound going through the house. Why would you do that? It's so rude,
I think it does have to do with this scarcity of economy of attention. That if this is a doorbell you're ringing in 1980, sure, it might set the dog barking, but like nobody's interrupted this person for several hours. So it's not that high a cost because it's like they're just doing some, you know what I mean? Like that. Whereas if they're constantly bombarded by interruption from their phone and everything else, then the doorbell is like on top of that. You're literally in my house. You're literally in front of my house demanding my attention, including to my phone blowing up. Like that's like, it's just, one too many things.
Right. Well, and I'd add, it's dependent on the ubiquity of the phone and the assumption that someone will always have their phone on them, which I'm just old enough and that I don't. And so, like I have to remind myself, I've ordered pizza. I better make sure I have my phone with me or I'm going to miss it. And it's going to sit there being cold for 20 minutes and the guy's going to be annoyed, and so, like younger people, my daughter always has her phone on her pretty much.
I mean, the idea that everything's mediated through the phone is also fascinating. I mean, that also, the idea that sort of, the way this has affected dating, where that's another social norm where it's like, I now know from 20 somethings that like to go up to someone in person and hit on them is sort of an invasion. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, there has been no algorithm that has verified this. Like, you're just coming fucking out of the blue. It's sort of like trying to sell someone on this, like it's like, because the idea that you would meet people in bars romantically, like that was a area of courtship, like a ritual that people engaged in. I mean, I never did, but like that was a thing that people did.
Yeah.
Like that was like a norm, but and now that's sort of either very old school, like it's a particular bar with a particular clientele where they've sort of asserting that that's still okay, or it's like kind of an invasion. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking the fact that like when you're in some places, when you're in, when you're in the Middle East, that like there's like a street culture where people are accosting you as you go through the marketplace, and they're immediately entering into a relationship with you to sell their oranges. You know what I mean? And that's like, if you're from a culture where that does not happen unless you explicitly go to a store and enter the store, and even then they don't talk to you until you bring stuff up to the counter. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, this social relation is unauthorized. And it strikes me as the same thing, where it's like, I never signed up for this app. Why are you talking to me?
Well, and I think it's interesting the ways, like, what leads people to break the conventions too. Like, I mean, like, so I'm a New Englander by training, right? And so when I moved to the Midwest, suddenly all the cashiers were talking to me, and I was like, what the hell? What's going on? Why are we having a chat about our kids or whatever, right? And it was okay, but it was disconcerting. But then what actually got intrusive was once when I was in Salt Lake City, where like a woman came up and started commenting on the contents of my grocery cart and saying, that's not enough to feed your kids. And I had no kids at that point, right? Like, it was just this, like, wow. And then also after I had cancer and my head, I lost my hair, gone through chemo, and total strangers in the grocery store multiple times came up to me and started talking to me about cancer, including like once I was in line and it had been a rough day and I didn't, I wasn't feeling great and I was like ready to cry. And the cashier kept trying to divert, like she could tell, and kept trying to divert this person, and this person would not be diverted. And it was awful. So yeah, it was, anyway, I'm not sure what
I feel like sort of like at WisCon for a while, there were these, as an accessibility thing for like neuroatypical stuff, there was a badge system where you had like red, yellow, and green. Like green was like, come talk to me. I'm in a mood where I'm happy for to have conversations with strangers. And like red was like, only if you know me or ask first. I don't know. There was like, there's a range. It would be, like having a flagging system of like, how much do I want to engage with the rest of the world would be, And then, the problem with such things is they're not always standardized. So it's like, something that, that's often a source of cultural friction, that people are like, it's perfectly fine for me to talk to you on the street. And it's like,
and to bring it back to writing, that can be a great source of plot tension. And, like it can escalate your plot to have that kind of thing happening.
Well, but the thing we were talking about cognitive attention in writing and multiple channels and everything. And we were talking about sort of audiovisual media, but I think also in prose writing, I feel like there's a certain, like, that there's more, I don't know, that's a good question. Like how much, that there are conventions of people, that there are multiple conversations happening, people getting texts and so on. It does seem like it's more common. But I don't know if, but I do think that there are these unexpected, it's like, there's one thing to just say, okay, the people are going to start texting each other. But then like the fact that these, like, for instance, different social norms emerge, like the pizza guy is not going to ring the bell. That's sort of a surprising consequence. And when you do things like you have different communication technologies, or you have some, the idea that like in your book where she is unused to having the chip in her head and whatever, like there's a whole bunch of like social, the way that it affects social norms that are kind of like knock-on effects that you have to think through and so on. Anyway, I really like the fact that as another example of the, like, your phone battery's dead or whatever, in Half-Built Garden, Ruth Anna has like this highly communal way of making decisions that then for very, like central reasons to the plot gets sort of corrupted. So they're now operating kind of without it. Like that's another one of those.
No, and it's well handled, and they in a variety of ways. Actually, I don't want to give that would be spoilers. So I'm not going to discuss what happens with it, but it's very cool how that plays out. So, all right, I think we're going to wrap.
I think we're good.
And we will come back
at some point.
More.
We'll have another Turkey City Lexicon episode at some point.
Is there anything you want to wrap with? I don't know we don't know when this is going to release right now, so I'm like, I don't know if there's anything particularly SLF-y or so on that I should be noting. So I'll just say, like, write to us. I would love to hear more comments on this. We are hoping to have a grab bag episode, so maybe this is a good time to mention that, of questions from the audience. So if any of this or anything else we've written has sparked something, write to us and maybe we'll read it on the air. And in fact, you can leave an audio recording. You can send us an audio recording and we can interpolate that into the show, speaking of different channels.
Like a real podcast.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't have to be a text or an email. It could be, there are many channels. So I suppose you could send a video recording. There's so many options. So look at that. I tied it all in. And thanks everybody for listening.
All right. Thanks.
Hey humans, don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and more so that you don't miss future episodes of MRAH and Rosenbaum Are Humans. Leaving us a good rating also helps us reach a wider audience. Engage with us on Twitter at MRAH Podcast and check out our weekly clips of episodes. If you want to reach us directly to ask questions or continue the conversation, you can email us at mrahpodcast@speclit.org.
This podcast is hosted by Marianne Mohanraj and Benjamin Rosenbaum. Editing and show notes by Darius Vinisar. Music composed by Thor Bremer. And cover art by Stephanie Bailey. Thanks for tuning in to Mohanraj and Rosenbaum Are Humans.